Coming up next, we're firing up the DeLorean. We're going to set the circuits to the year. Well, it's actually a year that many claim were one of the 4 or 5 best years in rock history. In fact, it was so good, there were dozens of incredible songs that missed the charts entirely. I'm telling you, they were far better than the biggest hits of the last 20 years and a lot better than a lot of the #1 hits from this year. It was a year full of major label gambles, though, such as one ballsy decision that nearly ruined one of the most anticipated albums of the rock era. It's when the label released a disastrous lead-off single that tanked the record, and it took a miracle to course correct. But decades later, that song is much better than you remember. Then there's one of the catchiest songs of the decade that the lead singer felt was below average at best, but it took his underground band to American radio. And an infamous rock song that included the real unedited sounds of a sexual act that took place right in the middle of the recording session, and it was nearly banned from being put in stores because of it. And last but not least, the biggest waste of a hit song in history. It's a song that was so catchy and cool, it's actually a tragedy that it wasn't a hit. Let's do this. Hey, music junkies, Professor Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Make sure to subscribe below so you know when our stuff comes out and get your vintage years collection. All right, we're setting the circuits for a great year, not only in music, but in pop culture altogether. It was the year that Moonstruck and Predator and Fatal Attraction came out in theaters.
You're bleeding, man. I ain't got time to bleed.
It's also the year that LA Law was big on TV, A Different World, The Cosby Show was coming into their own. It's also the year that Magic Johnson and the Lakers won the first of 2 straight titles.
Amazingly, 25 of 40 NBA titles won by one of these teams.
If you haven't guessed it by now, I'm talking about the year 1987. One of the best years in music history. It was a year of incredible albums: Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, Whitesnake, In Excess, Kick. You had the Smiths, Strange Ways. You had the Cure, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. It goes on and on and on. Michael Jackson, Bad came out, you know. In the beginning, though, God made the land, then he made water and creatures, and then according to the anthropologist known as Def Leppard, he made women. The title of the song, this number 10 on our countdown of the top 10 non-hits of 1987 from Hysteria, one of the biggest albums ever. Women by Def Leppard stands out as one of the riskiest first U.S. singles ever released from a major album. I think it's number 1. Of course, it came from Hysteria, chosen as a setup track for the highly anticipated album, to showcase their hard rock image. It's also one of the first tracks that drummer Rick Allen, the Thunder God, worked on after his near-fatal car accident in 1984. Now, the track was meant as a pro-woman anthem, more of a celebration than the usual over-the-top 80s rock bravado. Although the band favored Animal as the first single, their U.S. label pushed for women, and they want to do that to reassure American fans of their hard rock identity after such a long hiatus. Producer Mutt Lange started the tune with the goal of creating a celebration of women that avoids the typical misogynistic rock cliches. That was what he said. And according to Def Leppard tour history, for Rick Allen, it was a significant comeback track. The slower groove-driven tempo helped him ease back into the studio to play drums after losing his left arm. I mean, one of the things that I truly admire the most about Def Leppard as a band is how they rallied around Rick. They waited for him. They kept him the integral part of the group, even though he was a one-armed drummer. Man, he became a legend to all of us Gen Xers. We were always talking about it. Animal was the first single in the UK off Hysteria, but Women came in first in the US, and the plan really backfired on Polygram Records. It almost leveled Hysteria before it even got started. I mean, the excitement around the release of Hysteria was everywhere. Do you remember it? I mean, it was the talk of the industry, and radio really amped up the LP drop with album premiere parties and all kinds of on-air promotions. It was huge. And then when fans heard Women as their first sample of the much-hyped record, they were underwhelmed, to say the least. Rock stations gave it heavy airplay because of, palpable interest, but consequently, Women peaked at a respectable number 7 on the mainstream rock chart. But it died at number 80 on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, fortunately for Def Leppard, the album was so stacked that they were able to overcome an alarmingly slow start, even when Animal was slow as the second single. But, the title track and Pour Some Sugar on Me saved it from total failure, and it was close to failure. Hysteria eventually lived up to the hype. It sold over 25 million copies worldwide, 12 million in the US alone. And if things would have went a little bit differently, it could have been a disaster. Remember, they spent so much money in the studio and so much time, they would have had to sell 5 million copies just to break even. And when Women failed, it was a long road back. But they did it. By the way, that climactic moment at the end of Women was actually a goof. The key change during Phil Collins' solo that they kept in the final edit. And it's a lot better than we remember. I mean, almost 40 years later, Women is a really good song. All right, at number 9 on our countdown of the top 10 non-hits of 87, we're going to take a ride with our best friend, and we're going to spotlight And Never Let Me Down Again by Depeche Mode. I say that because of that song, You'll Dance to Anything by Depeche Mode.
You'll dance to anything by Depeche Mode.
Are there any Dead Milkmen fans out there that remember that one? So Never Let Me Down Again is about drug euphoria, not friendship, as many believed at first. Depeche's primary lyricist, Martin Gore, said the track has nothing to do with relationships. Instead, he explained it's about the idea of escaping from reality and the evil wake-up call that follows, any kind of fleeing, drugs, alcohol, you name it. I'm taking a ride with my best friend. New Musical Express writer Jane Solanas even described the track as capturing drug euphoria. In this deliciously dark DM song, best friend equals the drug. The line, I'm taking a ride with my best friend, that's often resonant metaphor for using drugs, specifically heroin, with the best friend being the substance itself. And when the lyrics say, I hope he never lets me down again, of course it taps into the fear of the high ending and the withdrawal that comes after the high. One of the most talked about lines in the song, though, is promises me I'm safe as houses as long as I remember who's wearing the trousers. It's a slight ironic nod to losing control, where the drug or the dangerous situation calls the shots while still pretending everything's under control. As long as I remember who's wearing the trousers. Never Let Me Down Again was released as the second single from the album Music for the Masses. Now, interestingly, the album title was a sarcastic jab by Martin and bandmate Andy Fletcher. I think I talked about that when we did our songography on it many years ago. They were feeling the pressure to make more commercial music from the label, so they threw out a title that teased the very idea of creating pop music. Never Let Me Down Again, truly one of those haunting tracks from the 80s, but it was not a hit single. In 1987, it sold at number 63 on the Billboard Hot 100. What a loss. All right, our countdown of the top 10 non-hits of 87 floats along, gliding on the water and sharing the moonlight. Here's Lips Like Sugar by Echo and the Bunnymen at number 8. I love this song. Now, despite what one critic described as a hook-heavy reverb bomb, this is such a great song. Echo and the Bunnymen originally viewed Lips Like Sugar in their 1987 self-titled album as a failure. They felt hypocritical for chasing the commercial label game, abandoning their raw post-punk edge to make something more palatable for pop radio. Ian McCulloch initially felt Lips Like Sugar was too commercial and too far removed from the core of Echo's sound, describing it in 1992 as just an okay song, average, one that got caught in a new mentality. Ian elaborated, calling that new mentality Radio America. Lips Like Sugar is undoubtedly the most commercial song that Echo has ever recorded, for sure. It was a success at alternative rock, but as a single from a band playing the so-called radio game, it was a total stiff. Didn't even crack the Billboard Hot 100. Still, Lips Like Sugar is an amazing track. It deserves so much more praise. I mean, when you hear that chorus, Lips like sugar. I mean, you can't help but sing along. It's just, I mean, sure, it was very homogenized by the Bunnymen standards, but it was a mesmerizing song created by one of the most interesting groups of the 80s for sure. Now, Bono gave Echo and Lips Like Sugar an incredible compliment when he stated that he didn't think U2 would be as good as they are without Echo and the Bunnymen. That's pretty cool. The group inspired and motivated the lads from Ireland. Bono added that Echo really raised the standard in what could be achieved by not growing up. I love that. In particular, Bono loved Mac's baritone delivery on the romantically whimsical verses on Lips Like Sugar. He also loved Will Sargent's guitar lead on the song, saying that it's the component that gave the song its seductive allure. And he would say that Will was such a humble guy that he never heard him comfortably accept a compliment. As it was, Will would say that he just starts playing the guitar not knowing where the hell he's going to end up. Sugar kissing. Lips Like Sugar and Echo and the Bunnymen, seriously, one of the coolest acts of the 80s. I mean, they sound like the Doors, new wave Doors. I mean, their ties to the Doors are very, I mean, you can tell, you can just hear it. And they're just, even though they sound like the Doors, are completely original. All right, next up on our countdown are the top 10 non-hits of 1987. It's one of the most scandalous recordings ever put down from the band that made the landmark album of 87. Number 7, I got Rocket Queen by Guns N' Roses. Man, Rocket Queen from the 1987 debut album Appetite for Destruction. The notorious story is that the track includes a real unsimulated audio of SEX in the studio. Axl Rose wanted genuine, suggestive sounds for the bridge, and he brought in Adriana Smith, the dancer who was dating GNR's drummer Steven Adler on and off, to help pull off the idea. Now, reportedly, the engineers placed the mics close to the floor in the vocal booth, and they captured roughly 30 minutes of intimacy, let's say. Adriana later spoke about the immense shame and guilt she felt, which actually contributed to a difficult period with addiction for her. And Steven Adler reportedly freaked out when he found out what had happened. I'm surprised he didn't quit or just punch Axl out altogether. Now, Adriana Smith is the person making the quote-unquote sounds on the track. But Axl later said he wrote the lyrics for a woman named Barbie Von Greif, who was a fixture in LA's underground scene whom he was infatuated with at the time. As the closing cut on Appetite for Destruction, Rocket Queen was not released as a single, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. In fact, there were a lot of record stores who would not even carry the record because of the cover and this song, and it was going to be banned. The band pushed the limits whenever possible. This is mostly why they shot to mega stardom. But Geffen Records knew the track would never be played on the radio unless they edited the crap out of it. And needless to say, Axl would not have allowed that to happen because, of course, it would have changed what he intended Rocket Queen to be in the first place. And that wasn't the only classic from Appetite for Destruction that wouldn't be released as a single due to questionable content. Mr. Brownstone would have been a hit. I think it would have been. But that old man is a real I took him on down the line. It had probably the most famous F-bomb from a song in the 80s, right? One that my friends and I must have rewound 1,000 times and laughed our heads off. I mean, hey, we were in junior high. All right, on a lighter note, rolling along with our top 10 non-hits of 87, I got Heart with I Want You So Bad at number 6. I Want You So Bad from Heart's 1987 album Bad Animals has a pretty telling backstory. The band really felt the heat to keep up their commercial momentum, which is part of why they were kind of forced to use outside songwriters to compose this track. The tune was written by the brilliant Tom Kelly and Billy Steinberg, the same duo behind Heart's huge US #1 hit, Alone. And while I Want You So Bad lost steam at number 49, it did get a remixed radio version and served as the fourth and final single from Bad Animals, making Heart's last single of the 80s. And it was a lot better than its chart position. Lyrically, Kelly and Steinberg wrote a sincere power ballad, but musically the tempo stays steady and mid-pace from start to finish, not really letting the song fully slow down even as the longing in the lyrics comes through. Production-wise, the song is tied to a broader controversial push led by producer Ron Nevison and the label, really, to get Hart to record outside material to ensure radio play. The band was growing really tired of that approach at the time, for sure. Actually, a lot of people mix up I Want You So Bad with Hart's 1990 track, All I Want to Do Is Make Love to You, which has its own notorious backstory that we've covered before. But I Want You So Bad is most notable for showcasing Ann Wilson's vocal in a more direct, kind of a melodic pop rock frame. So it was funny, in between our interview, I actually asked Ann why they named the album Bad Animals, and she told me it was because they became so exhausted from rigorous nonstop touring. When they entered a lobby to check into a hotel, she thought they looked like bad animals with sunglasses. I love that. All right, cruising in halfway through our countdown at number 5, I've got Learning to Fly by Pink Floyd. Learning to Fly was a pivotal track for Pink Floyd after the contemptuous departure of co-founder Roger Waters. Just talked about it a couple of weeks ago. The song was inspired by David Gilmour's real-life endeavor of learning to fly airplanes in the mid-'80s. Gilmour, who was previously deathly afraid of flying, began taking pilot lessons around the time of the recording sessions for a momentary lapse of reason. He noted that the lyrics combine the actual mechanics of learning to fly an airplane with the metaphorical idea of breaking free, which was where he was at the time, right? The voice heard in the middle of the song, though, giving air traffic control commands, propellers fully forward, flaps set 10 degrees. That's actually Nick Mason, Pink Floyd's drummer. Many assumed it was David Gilmour, but Mason was also taking flying lessons at the time. Now, of course, the lyrics refer to being tongue-tied and twisted, just an earthbound misfit eye, a reference to his initial struggles in the air, but also the feeling of being artistically grounded. I love that. Learning to Fly marked Pink Floyd's first real single without Roger Waters, who had left in 1985 and said the band was a spent force. And the track signaled a new beginning for Gilmour and Mason as they figured out how to fly the band forward without their former leader. And man, I've always loved this song. I think it's incredible. It was so refreshing after the final cut. And it's just like David Gilmour, there's so much light in his voice and his playing, his tone and his guitar. It's lifting, it lifts you up. And it was in a moment where fans really needed that after such a dismal few years with Pink Floyd, let's be honest. But David Gilmour's aim was clear. Steer Pink Floyd toward a tighter, more musically focused direction. Waters, he argued that Pink Floyd was dead, and he tried to block Gilmour and Mason from using the name, suing to stop them from continuing without him as Pink Floyd. The threat clouded the making of A Momentary Lapse of Reason and took months to resolve after the album's release. Ultimately, the lawyers said the name had commercial value, and Waters could likely hinder them but not take the name altogether. The case settled out of court on December 23, 1987, and David Gilmour and Nick Mason stayed as Pink Floyd, much to Roger Waters' bitter annoyance. Learning to Fly made a big statement for Pink Floyd in their post-Waters period, rising to number 1 on the mainstream rock chart. But it did peter out on the Billboard Hot 100, landing at number 70 in '87. It deserved better for sure. All right, coming in at number 4 in our countdown of the top 10 non-hits of '87, it's a chaotic song that's one of the most difficult to sing along to. Talking about It's the End of the World as We Know It by R.E.M.
Pretty sight, it's the end of the world as we know it.
The title of the chorus actually came from a dream where Michael Stipe, the singer, was at a party with celebrities named Leonard Bernstein, Leonid Brezhnev, and Lenny Bruce, LB. The song has its roots in a track that was called Bad Day, and it's basically an anxiety-fueled stream of consciousness about the chaos in the world meant to make listeners feel okay despite it all.
Please don't take a picture, it's been a bad day. World as we know it, and I feel fine.
The rapid-fire, frantic delivery of the lyrics that makes it so difficult to follow along with Michael Stipe, that was directly inspired by Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. For years, fans misheard many of the lines, and Stipe has only recently clarified what he meant. The lines come from a mix of what he'd heard, read, or even seen on TV. Like I mentioned before, the lyric references to LB, Leonard Bernstein, Leonid Brezhnev, Lenny Bruce, that came from that vivid dream where Michael Stipe was the only one at the party whose initials were not LB. R.E.M's It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine, a parentheses song, although it came out 2 years prior, it's often lined up with Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire from 1989 as songs reflecting how chaotic the 20th century felt. Big difference is in how they did commercially, though. Billy Joel's single roared to number 1, while R.E.M's languished in the outer reaches of the Billboard Hot 100 and went to number 69. Both have the most lyrics ever stuffed into a hit song, with Fire barely topping in terms of actual word count. So there's that. All right, continuing with our countdown of the top 10 non-hits of 1987, we're up to a track by one of the most genius duos of the era, Morrissey and Marr, The Smiths, with Girlfriend in a Coma, number 3.
Girlfriend in a coma, I know.
Truly, this is one of those catchy songs that I can't believe it wasn't a hit because it's just a funny song. Released in 1987, it mixes a bright, breezy pop hook with truly dark, sardonic lyrics to probe a troubled relationship. The hook comes from the narrator's mixed emotions, pretending to grieve while secretly relieved or even callous, capturing the messy end of a relationship, but also the band's own internal dynamics. Morrissey always brought the drama. His lyric, there were times when I could have murdered her, but I would hate anything to happen to her. That points to a toxic, conflicted love rather than just simple heartbreak.
I would hate anything to happen to her.
Symbolically, the song is often read as a metaphor for the rift between Morrissey and guitarist Johnny Marr, a rift that broke up the band for good. There's also the double meaning angle. Some listeners thought the narrator is lying about how serious things are to win sympathy, with lines like, no, I don't want to see her, hinting at a desire to escape. Again, Girlfriend in a Coma is a very complicated track, as any Smith song would be.
No, I don't want to see her. Do you really think?
Now, this countdown, I don't think I've ever talked about it. I've just hoped that people would read between the lines. But I've always tried to pick songs that should have been hits because they were catchy, but they just missed the charts. Otherwise, if it was just the best song, I would have picked, Last Night I Dreamt Somebody Loved Me from Strange Always Here We Come, or even Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before.
Stop me if you think that you've heard this one before.
Because those were both, I think, superior songs. But Girlfriend in a Coma is truly this light and easy, catchy song that everybody's singing once they hear it. Now, the music for the song was inspired by Bob and Marcia's interpretation of To Be Young, Gifter, and Black by Nina Simone. It was one song that Maz and Marr were both very passionate about. Of course, their respective musical tastes were usually very different. The upbeat, almost playful arrangement contrasts with such morbid subject matter, adding a layer of black comedy or even emotional detachment. It was classic Morrissey and Marr, that tension that made for a powerful song. Do you remember the music video for Girlfriend in a Coma? Actually, it uses clips from the 1964 British film The Leather Boys, a choice that reinforces themes of entrapment and a failing young marriage. Very striking video for sure. The way it turned out, the enigmatic Girlfriend in a Coma was a cult favorite for me and other Smiths fanatics. Of course, it was a no-show at the Billboard Hot 100, even though it's one of the 2 or 3 Smith songs that non-fans know outside of How Soon Is Now and There's a Light That Never Goes Out, which just hit 1 billion streams, actually, on Spotify. All right, ranking at number 2 on our countdown of the top 10 nonsense of 87, ever so close to number 1. I went with the brilliant blend of nostalgia and social commentary, Time Stands Still by the Mighty Rush. Neil Peart wrote the lyrics as a reaction to the 70s and early 80s, when nonstop touring made life feel like a dark tunnel and left him neglecting friends and family. The message isn't nostalgia for the road. It's a plea to slow down and take stock of what's really important. The band also wanted a softer, more melodic feel than their earlier, heavier prog rock, so they thought a female voice would suit the mood and kind of smooth it out. So get this, they considered Cyndi Lauper and Chrissie Hynde at different points. I think they said no, actually. They ultimately invited Amy Mann, who'd been the voice and primary lyricist for Till Tuesday before going solo. Amy agreed to sing on Time Stands Still after Rush's management reached out. She found the song appealing and was drawn to that particular soft falsetto line that she was asked to deliver, and she did it brilliantly. At the time, she was not really familiar with Rush's catalog, but she was excited by the project and by what the band wanted. Colder, truer, more feminine textures to balance their Hold Your Fire era. Like I said, the theme, the lyrics for Time Stands Still grew out of a wish to slow time down. Actually, in the 2017 interview, Neil Peart said, "It can be frustrating when people ask, where did the time go?" He thinks the real truth is that people just weren't paying attention. The song's aim is to push listeners towards seizing the day, not just reminiscing about it, doing something. Musically, the choruses feature a distinctive float and rhythm guitar from Alex Lifeson. He treated it as a jazz-infected approach to hard rock, emphasizing changing note clusters instead of repeating the same chords, right? The music video, though, stands out for its heavy use of green screen, some of that for time. It had the band and Amy Mann and a drum kit all seeming to float around. They later admitted it was a little silly, but it was a really memorable experiment. Time Stands Still became a top 3 track on the Billboard mainstream rock chart, and it even title-linked their 2015 documentary, which followed the band on a highly emotional final tour, but fell just short of being a hit on the Billboard Hot 100. It actually peaked at number 42. All right, before we unveil the song we selected as a number 1 non-hit in 1987, I do want to give an honorable mention to Running to Stand Still by U2 from the Joshua Tree. Running to Stand Still by U2 is an intense ballad about a Dublin couple who are battling heroin addiction in the Bunnymen Flats. It's actually rooted in the serious 80s Irish drug scene. The line in the title comes from Bono's brother, who used to say he felt like he was always working just to get by.
She's running to stand still.
Bono turned that idea really into a metaphor for the desperate struggle of addiction. It was kind of a part 2 to U2's song Shadows and Tall Trees from 1980. The song was one of the most important tracks on the Joshua Tree, but it wasn't released as a single, thus it didn't enter into any music surveys for 87, but man, it's a brilliant song and a brilliant vocal by Bono.
Suffer the needle chill.
All right, friends and foes, we have reviewed 1987. I've come up with the top 10 songs that absolutely should have been hits on the Billboard Hot 100 that were not. And I've come up with my number 1 pick. Can anybody guess what it is? This is a band that never had a hit, and this should have been a smash. It is such a no-brainer. It's such a great song, so catchy. The Replacements. Can't hardly wait. The Replacements really lit me up with Can't Hardly Wait. I think it's the biggest waste of a hit song in 80s rock history. How the hell was this song not a number 1 smash? It's one of the best singles of its time. I mean, it starts off a pining, road-weary tune, a song about the grind of touring and a little bit of romantic longing that feels almost despondent.
Lights that flash in the evening.
But as it develops, it turns into a punchy pop rock energizer, and the moment it really comes alive is when Alex Chilton, the hero to the band, steps in and lays down a memorable guitar part. I mean, Paul Westerberg and his bandmates were heavily influenced by Alex Chilton's musicianship, but when they got the thrill of working with him in person, they discovered there was a lot more to him than his art. Paul Westerberg shared that Alex Chilton had an extraordinary aura that made him like no other. Paul stated that his aura is different than the average person. He could be from another planet. This whole thing grew out of heartache. Frontman Paul Westerberg, one of the best writers of his time, he was dealing with a long-distance romance with Lori Beiser, a University of Michigan radio DJ, which flavored the tune's lyrics and vibe. Early drafts of Can't Hardly Wait, written around the time that they were making the Tim era material in '85, center more on the loneliness of life on the road. Imagery like lights that flash through a hole in the drapes. One of my favorite passages from the song, by the way. And by the time the track was finalized for the album Pleased to Meet Me, Alex Schultz was in Ardent Studios in Memphis, adding his distinctive touch to the track. Now, the rough unreleased versions were rougher indeed, but the final cut brings in brass and a high-energy bounce that gives the song a polished, romantically charged lift. This song, it just raises you up.
I can't wait.
Paul Westerberg and Lori Beiser, they eventually tied the knot in 1987, and it was the first marriage for both of them. Despite the intense passion that brought them together in the first place, Paul and Lori divorced in 1996. Now, Paul later wed former pianist and author Lori Lindeen in 2003, but that marriage also ended in 2014. Lori Lindeen, described by First Avenue as a dominant force in the 80s and 90s female rock movement in Minneapolis, actually passed away in 2024. In 2006, Paul had a serious accident while trying to remove candle wax with a screwdriver of all things, which left the ring finger on his left hand numb. As an update, Paul actually lives in Edina. And interesting note, since we were talking about Lori being a DJ, Paul Westerberg's sister Mary has been a long-standing DJ on the Minnesota NPR station 89.3 The Current. Can't Hardly Wait was the third single from Pleased to Meet Me, but it was nowhere near becoming a hit. I don't know how. Still, it's one of the best tracks by one of my all-time favorite groups, and my pick is the best non-hit of 1987. Seriously, go listen to Can't Hardly Wait. You listen to it and you're like, it's just, how is it not a hit? I mean, it doesn't, the charts get things wrong, whatever, but this is a perfect pop song. It's perfect. By the way, Can't Hardly Wait to talk about it in the comments. The Replacements, the most frustrating band of all time, I'll tell you. The most frustrating band ever. I've never been more frustrated with a band. This is a band that could have been massive. Paul Westerberg was one of the best writers of his time. They were so hell-bent on not selling out that they really screwed up their career. And it's one of the saddest stories in rock and roll. I've talked about them here and there, but they're in my top 10 favorite bands of all time. I love the Replacements. I think they were an unstoppable force. One night they could be the best band in the world, and the next night they could be sloppy drunk and the worst band in the world. Very frustrating band. I just had to get off my chest. But the music remains and will always remain as the strength of the Mats. All right, let's have a great discussion below. Let me know, what are your top 10 non-hits of 1987? What do you think about my picks? Let's share our memories. Man, 1987, can we go back? Can we go back? Oh, man, I love 87. Until next time, well, make sure to subscribe. But until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.